What was the result of the flood?
Oh, sorry. So Lake Highland Preparatory, and we are Athens speaking first. First speaker is Leo Patel. Alright. Okay. We affirm our sole contention concerns the efficacy of the UN. With a conflict-ridden global environment, international organizations are tasked with the jobs of fostering peace and stability. However, as the world continues to evolve, the UNSC, or the United Nations Security Council, has remained an archaic system of the past. In fact, despite decades-long continuous calls for reform, being at the Council of Foreign Relations in 2012 finds that the structure of the Security Council has remained the exact same since 1963. Without meaningful reform, the body will be seen as neither legitimate nor effective in enforcing international law and issues of importance. We'll shift to other institutional frameworks and regional frameworks. Ultimately, Han Evans, former Foreign Minister of Australia, concludes that without reform, the credibility and authority of the Security Council will be non-existent, threatening the collapse of the organization within the next 15 years. Affirming, in addition to proving that change is possible, will shift this narrative in two key ways. First is adding Indian influence. Zabadi, 2017, of Nair University, explains that a seat on the high table would provide India with a much needed leverage to expand its geopolitical and geoeconomic clout globally. This is because Leiden University in 2015 explains that permanent members have much more leverage over member states, more sway in informal discussions, and more power in decision making. Even if the veto isn't used, that it could be used gives permanent members more influence. Indeed, permanent members have 10 times more voting power than temporary members. Crucially, India uniquely favors an activist UN. Specifically, the IPS finds that India has contributed more peacekeeping operations, or PKOs, than any other country. They've created a UN fund aimed at supporting sustainable development for low-income nations. And Agrawal of the Observer Research Foundation finds that India's call for structural reforms that would decrease the human response time to global crises. Adding India as a permanent member would thus push the UNSC to increase its focus on said initiatives. Second is boosting legitimacy. Currently, Brian BBC in 2015 quantifies that almost 75% of the world's population is effectively disenfranchised from the Security Council, causing the developing world to turn away from the Council towards other frameworks. For instance, POPI, the Commission on Global Security in 2015 contextualizes that African nations have created their own security apparatus, APSA, to intervene without Security Council authorization. And Arab states have formed a unit to address conflict in Yemen without UN approval. Fortunately, Narlikar of Chatham House in 2017 explains that India's foreign engagement is focused on directing the agenda and international organizations towards the marginalized concerns and causes of developing nations. Minister of the IPSA in 2006 confirms that India's current actions, such as their diplomatic aid efforts in third world countries like the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, Congo, Namibia, and Niger, indicate that India has geostrategic interests in maintaining the peace, stability, and development of developing nations across the world. If the Security Council does not become more democratic, the UN risks being paralyzed as an institution. McDonald of the Council on Foreign Relations in 2010 concludes that failure to adjust the UNSC composition will complicate multilateralism for decades to come, as frustrated aspirants will reduce their investments in diplomatic support for this institution, depriving the UN of its needed capabilities and reducing its overall effectiveness. Already, the WFMC finds that many governments have withdrawn funding and support from important UN agencies, and important international prohibitions on intervention and use of weapons of mass destruction are already being ignored. In fact, the United Nations is nearly $2 billion in debt as countries refuse to pay their dues. This dire situation is only set to get worse as time goes on. Restoring UN legitimacy is crucial for global development. Holtman of Upsala University in 2018 finds that if the UN had invested more into peacekeeping operations or PKOs, major armed conflict would have been reduced by 2/3. In addition, Jones of The Guardian in 2015 explains that the UN Sustainable Development Goals Initiative have lifted more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. Both 800 million people still impoverished, there remains much work to be done, and for these reasons, we affirm the resolution.
Highland negates contention one is dissolving legitimacy. India's permanency damages the Security Council's legitimacy in two ways, and the first is amending the UN Charter. Patrick from the Council on Foreign Relations in 2010 writes that the legitimacy of the Council as currently constituted is clear. It emanates from the UN Charter. As long as the Charter remains unamended, the existing Council structure is legitimate. Problematically, adding India to the Council would force the Charter to be amended, putting its legitimacy in jeopardy. Second is worsening human rights. Muhammad Abedin furthers in 2015 that India is widely infamous for its religious and social violence and terrible human rights. Patrick from the Council on Foreign Relations in 2010 writes that India would use their newfound status to ramp up anti-US discourse in the Council, diverging from Western ideals on human rights. Critically, Human Rights Council in 2017 explains that as a permanent member of the Security Council, India's abuse would damage the legitimacy of the Council as a whole. The impact of dissolved legitimacy is ineffective execution of resolutions. Hurd of Northwestern University in 2002 furthers that the power of the Security Council depends on the voluntary cooperation of states, furthering that states' perceptions of the Council's legitimacy and its actions determine their voluntary compliance. India's permanent seat would dissolve the Council's legitimacy, causing states to disregard the Council's decisions. Empirically, this is true. Hurd finds that in 1992, the sanctions imposed by the Council on Libya were successfully delegitimized, causing sanctions to fail. Contention 2 is aggressing Kashmir. Mossy of Washington Post in 2019 writes that the new urgency of Indo-Pak tensions has brought both countries to the negotiating table, reflecting active initiatives of de-escalation from both India and Pakistan. Problematically, there are two ways that India's permanent seat on the Security Council reignites the conflict in Kashmir, and the first is Indian veto aggression. Hashim from Al Jazeera in 2012 writes that the UN Charter clearly outlines that all permanent members have veto power under de facto membership. Problematically, Sharon from the University of Illinois in 2015 writes that if India gets a permanent seat with veto power, they will block any resolution regarding intervention in Kashmir. Critically, Reuters in 2019 finds that Pakistan is heavily reliant on UN intervention and they cannot handle Indian aggression in Kashmir unilaterally. By vetoing resolutions on Kashmir, India's permanent seat opens the door for aggression. The second is extremist militancy. Wani of the Diplomat writes in 2018 that peace and diplomacy between India and Pakistan has brought militancy in Kashmir to an all-time low. Unfortunately, India's permanent seat would symbolize a shift in global power and raging anti-Indian militant groups. Paul from the University of Maryland in 2008 confirms that a rise in Indian political and diplomatic power enrages anti-Indian militancy in Kashmir, reigniting the conflict. The impact is psychological violence. Iqbal of MedAct writes in 2019 that decades of violence and conflict have taken a huge toll on the mental health of those living in the Kashmir Valley. Mental health experts note a rise in symptoms of suicidal thoughts at a rate of 34%. By allowing conflict to be reignited, the affirmative facilitates psychological violence. Contention 3 is legitimizing Modi. Sashi of the Asian Times as of 4 days ago finds that the present Prime Minister of India's Narendra Modi, his unpopularity is reflected in the dissatisfaction of voters, unconvinced on what the government has done to address structural issues. Sashi further finds that given Modi's poor performance as Prime Minister, he will be the underdog in the ongoing national election. Problematically, granting India's permanent membership on the Security Council would effectively guarantee the re-election of Modi, as Dave of the RPGG in 2017 writes that foremost in Indian calculus lies the Indian aspiration of the institutionalized big power status. The permanent seat in the Security Council would confer on India right away. The Economist in 2019 finds that a more powerful India emboldens Hindu nationalism and Modi's base. An affirmative ballot guarantees Modi's re-election. The impact is violence against Muslims. The Economist in 2019 explains that rising Hindu nationalism supported by Modi strays into xenophobia and intolerance of dissent. Griswold of Harvard in 2019 reports that between 2014 and 2017, incidents of communal violence against Muslims has risen by 28%. Thus, we negate.
Can I say a couple of these first? Can I first see the that like India and the United States aren't allies? Then can I see that
Wait, what card was that?
the United States and India are not allies? That like India is anti-US.
Oh, and they
Oh.
will and against the West. Yeah.
Yeah. Could we see shift to other frameworks? It's Patrick, right?
Yeah,
From
sure,
Foreign
sure.
Relations.
Can I also see that Modi is unpopular right now?
Yeah. So this is that they'll fight human rights.
If you had the full
West.
PDF, that'd be great. Or like the live website would be.
This is that their
Yeah.
what? Wait, what is this?
This is the human rights that they'll ramp up against.
No, the ones that you said that they're anti-US.
Oh, this just says that they're Western human
Okay.
rights.
You want that they're switching to other frameworks?
Yeah, the PDF for Council on Foreign
Okay,
Relations.
Okay.
2 seconds.
And then do you want another
Oh,
copy?
yeah, the one that says that Modi is losing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just that last line. It talks about how we're going through a political crisis.
Okay.
It's fine.
There you go.
14 seconds.
Oh wait, but then where does it say he's gonna lose? He's not winning.
Oh, I don't know if it specifically says that. That's because they're not releasing the polls in the election.
Yeah, that's
Like,
right.
you can't. It just says.
That was 6 seconds.
Okay. Okay. So, how is the legitimacy of the UNSC increasing if African nations and Arab nations are moving away because legitimacy is not there?
Our argument, well, I think there's two things. First, you make this assumption that legitimacy is not there, which we'd argue is completely true. In fact, Arunam's going to get up here and give you 3 reasons why that's not true. Like, countries are paying tons of money to try and get on. If it was truly illegitimate, people wouldn't try to
why
get
is
try to
the
get on.
UN $2 billion in debt if no one is paying their dues because it's illegitimate?
Okay, we'll contest that then.
Okay.
You can make that point.
Yeah, you can have a question.
Sweet. So your impact of you like reading the impact of poverty off of illegitimacy, right?
Yeah, no. We're saying that in the status quo, the UN has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty. But right now in the status quo, it is not that illegitimate, and the effectivity of the UN could be much better. So there's 800 million people still impoverished, and with India on the council, there's more legitimacy, more PKOs, more UN mediation, and solving.
Okay, so you're saying the UN is just going to be able to do more things, right?
Because no. First, I would say India provides what developing nations and third world nations need. A provides legitimacy and international scrutiny towards the council, and B provides democracy and the developing world's needs. But could I
Okay,
have a
so
question?
just one follow-up to that. Your whole argument relies on the idea that India is going to be representing third world interests, correct?
Yeah, literally all these nations that have turned away have said, because India is not there, we are not providing our interests and our faith into India because they're not on the UNSC.
Okay, the last time India was a non-permanent member on the UN Security Council, did they go for African and third world interests, or did they abstain from every vote and actually not support them?
Wait, repeat your question.
Yeah, so the last time India was on the was a non-permanent member on the UN Security Council,
Yeah.
did they put forth any policy whatsoever to help African nations?
Yes.
Can we take a look at that?
Yeah. We would say that in the status quo, India is pushing for reform. We can give you that card, but that reform is not very effective. We're saying once India gets onto the council, this internal reform will be much more effective than what's happening right now.
What does this reform look like?
Okay, so India thinks of a policy that they want to extend. For example, representing developing world's needs.
Yeah, like what is this policy?
I don't know. Santiago can bring it up in rebuttal. So I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So you're saying right now Modi is very unpopular, so he's using nationalism to increase tensions, and somehow in the next world you're going to solve that.
So essentially our argument here is that right now the election between Modi and Gandhi as the other candidate is really, really close. But Modi has essentially made it a pillar of his platform, which India really likes, is that he's going to get them more power.
That's not the actual situation. We're saying that right now in the status quo, Modi is increasing nationalism and tensions. But in the situation where actually India gets onto the council, all that is going to go away because it's backing from the international community.
Okay.
You guys done, bro?
Yeah, let's do a little bit, bro.
Cool.
Alright, we're gonna start now.
Okay, that was 11 seconds.
So in total, we've used 17.
17. Yeah. Just gonna go down the case. First I'm gonna start with a little bit of Wayne, and then I'm gonna go down the case.
Should be full the way.
No, just let next to your case.
Cool.
Okay. On Wayne, link. They talk about mental health and the decreasing legitimacy. However, we outweigh their entire case on scope alone. We tell you because of a lack of funding, if they're like the UN was funded even more, they could have decreased conflict by 2/3, and even more so. They're trying to pass policy right now to help billions of people around the world. However, because of its illegitimacy, it needs to help 800 million people. We say affirming helps that. They don't even impact you to even a million people. So on scope, we outweigh. But then go to the first contention on legitimacy. The problem here is that uniqueness controlled its direction and link. That's why Stevens of the BSSC in 2018 explains that while in the past other factors contributed to a lack of UNC legitimacy, the only cause of legitimacy deficit right now is a lack of a global representation. That's why the RPP finds that 85% of reform proposals advocate for an increase in permanent membership. That's why our evidence, the Poppy from the Commission on Global Insecurity in case says that countries in Africa and Arab states are turning away and forming their own coalitions. If their argument were true, then it would be happening in the status quo. Our argument is that it's decreasing right now because of a lack of representation. But then, let's go to their first link on a UN charter. The problem here is that India hasn't explicitly come out and said that they will reform the UN charter. India is actually going to just reform PKOs because that's what they explicitly come out and said. They just want to reform the structure of reform, and the UN charter. It's not the UN charter itself. It doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't say. They don't say why the UN charter actually impacts legitimacy. But then, on their second link on human rights relations, the problem here is that India is on the international stage, and when they get to the UNSC, there's no reason they want to throw all support away for violating human rights in Kashmir, especially when they need international support to pass reforms, policies, and operations on the permanent seat. But more specifically, let's go to their second contention on Kashmir. Their first link talks about Indian veto aggression. A couple of problems here. First is that it's very vague. Make them prove to you that UN resolutions are actually a sufficient deterrent. But two, delink them, because there's no probability that the UN will actually mediate the Kashmir conflict, because they haven't done it in the last 50 years. There's no reason they would do it right now. In fact, Zavaya 04 from Boston College explains that the last two Kashmir resolutions in the 1990s or in the 1900s by the UN actually pushed two nations to other mediators. But third, Gutierrez of the Economic Times in 2018 writes that the UN will not intervene in the Kashmir conflict unless both Pakistan and India agree. So regardless, if you affirm, India will always have the ability to block a UN intervention on Kashmir. But still, the international image response also applies here. India still needs an international image to pass any reform. But then the second link on military and increasing nationalism. Two problems here. First, it's not unique because Indian fighter planes are flying bombing Kashmir, and Modi's scorched earth operation all-out policies and to end all resistance and current leadership in Kashmir indicates that India has been aggressive in the status quo. They never proved to you a bright line to how much more aggressive India will get as a permanent member. But second, turn the argument against them. Because empirically, Reuters in 2019 explains that as Modi loses support, his insecurity drives him to increase tensions with Pakistan to boost nationalism. Since granting permanent security membership would reduce this insecurity, Modi wouldn't have to bomb Pakistan to drum nationalism at all. Go to their third contention on Modi's re-election. First, it's not unique because Jodri of the CNBC a week ago finds that Modi's going to win the election regardless. It'll just be a really close win. That means that Modi is going to win the conflict, win the election in either world. In a neg world, it's very close victory. In an af world, it's a larger margin. But anyways, this is a reason to vote for us because a close win would make Modi and the BJP much more desperate to drive up their support. Mugdal of the Al Jazeera in 2014 finds that the BJP is attempting to secure support by spurring nationalism and fomenting the Hindus' majority prejudices against Muslims. So it's better if he wins by a larger margin rather than a close margin because he has to be much more violent and aggressive if he wins by a close margin. But secondly, this mitigates this argument because it's a very short term. People have short memories and the next election will probably have new issues. They never impact out to what Modi will actually do. All their impacts are very vague. We tell you that we save hundreds of millions of lives when you vote for the affirmative.
Can we see the card that says, member states will pay their dues if India gets on the council, and that Modi will...
that's not the card. We're saying that member states aren't paying their dues.
Yeah,
It's the opposite.
Any link evidence says that India fixes that because that's the outweigh scope you give us.
Okay. What's that?
Just
Second column?
where do you see?
Okay, please.
Or if it even says they're not represented and that's why they don't pay their dues. Just something.
That's the reason.
That's perfect. And then also the card that says Modi's going to win.
Oh wait, it says they're not represented. That's why they don't pay their dues.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fine. We don't need to see it then.
Okay.
I want to see that.
you want to see the Modi?
Yeah, can we see Modi movie? Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Sorry, one second.
No, you're good.
You want the PDF or the card?
The card.
Are you gonna start cards?
Oh, we
yeah.
don't have a timer, so.
Oh, cheers.
yeah, I forgot. I'm sorry.
no, you're good. Thank you. Okay, that's fine.
I got 6 seconds. Is that okay?
Oh, I don't need
Oh, should I take any time?
Yeah, 14. Yeah.
So what's the order gonna be?
It's gonna be front lines first, and then down your case.
Okay.
Actually, no, we're gonna go the other way. We're gonna attack case first and then front.
Oh, okay.
Is everyone ready?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Let's start off with the top of their case. They tell you that right now we need reform. Right now there's a shift towards other frameworks. You've been dealing them for 3 reasons I hear from the Council on Foreign Relations. The first one is that right now the Council is not illegitimate because they just go towards other frameworks and check with other nations, seeing that they're still legitimate because the perception of behavior is still towards the Council. The second is that the inherent idea that states are still following policy shows that they still believe the Council's decisions are legitimate. And the third and most important one that Jackson alludes to in Crossfire is that every single October the UNGA gets thousands of proposals towards getting on non-permanent seats, and states spend millions of dollars in order to get these seats. They would not be doing so if they viewed the council as legitimate. In fact, they would be rejecting the council's ideals. That shows that on 3 reasons they're not having legitimacy problems right now. Then they say the council's going to collapse in 15 years. No warrant from this from their card. But then on their first link, they tell you that India's influence is going to be expanding. 3 link terms right here. The first one is that Modi will hurt their legitimacy when he wins the election, because in their world you allow it to be a close fight. We would say, or in their world you allow it to be a landslide. In our world, as long as it is a close fight, we have the risk of solvency that Modi does not win the election, which means that he doesn't hurt the legitimacy and spread India's bad influence of bad human rights. But then secondly, you can link to them because of bad human rights. Our second warrant tells you that right now India is ramping up bad human rights, and that would inherently hurt the legitimacy of the Security Council, because when they get on the council, they set a precedent for worse human rights policies. That means that countries that they condemn for bad human rights inherently don't follow those resolutions. But third, you can link to them because what Northwestern University in 2002 finds is that the voluntary compliance of nation states in the Security Council is what determines their legitimacy. Right now, states are following UN resolutions, so their entire argument of legitimacy going away is we control the uniqueness on it. So you can take out that link. Then they talk about how India's influence is going to increase peacekeepers. You can turn that against them too, because right now, Al-Jazeera in 2017 finds is that peacekeepers commit crimes with impunity like sexual violence, which increases psychological violence by 89%. Then on their second link, they tell you that they're going to be boosting legitimacy. The first thing that they say is that states are turning to other frameworks right now. There's 2 problems here. One, they only give you a single example of another framework. But 2, even if you buy this example, what Patrick from the Council on Foreign Relations in 2010 finds is that these other frameworks are actually a reason for why states want to align with the Security Council, because they turn toward other frameworks right now to align and actually adapt towards current resolutions in the Council, which means that all these other frameworks are a part of our world. That means that right now we control the unions on this argument as well. Do not give them that link. Then they tell you that India would help in third world countries. This is going to be the term that loses in the debate. What Mukherjee 13 from Yale University finds is that the last time India was a non-permanent member in 2012, they did not do a single thing to help African, Middle Eastern, or Asian states. The reason is because they only want the seat after they get off the council. The things that they're doing right now, like giving aid towards Africa, is to get the council. But when they were actually a non-permanent member, they did not do the things that Africa needed for representation. That inherently means that there's absolutely no reason to buy their rhetoric or their narrative telling you that India is going to be all representative. When they were on the council, they weren't. But after they got off the council, they started doing all these good things to get legitimacy. Let's go, and then they just say like countries are not paying their dues. Countries are not going to be paying their dues again because India doesn't represent their world interests. Empirically true. Let's go on to our side of the case. On our first link about amending the charter, they don't control uniqueness here because we tell you right now states are going for voluntary compliance. But then they say that India would not go for reform. The argument isn't that India would reform the charter. It's the fact that when you add India and you affirm the resolution, you have to amend the UN charter, which takes away legitimacy. Then on human rights, they say that right now they're going to stop supporting stop supporting human rights away. That's the entire point. What we tell you is right now there's support going away because India would get on the Security Council. That's what triggers the link. Then on Pakistan, take the first link about the veto, we're going for the second one. All they say is that right now it's aggressive because India is aggressive right now. The link isn't about India being aggressive right now, it's about Pakistan being aggressive right now. Then they say you can turn it because Modi decreases support to decrease conflict. No, Modi will be nationalist whether he's in office or not. The only link of Modi not causing more conflict is if he gets out of office. The margin of his win doesn't decrease his legitimacy. Then on contention 3, they say it's a close win. Their evidence does not talk about the parliamentary win right now. Our evidence does. But then they say that it's a close win means like a larger win decreases nationalism. That's inherently not true. A win is a win which increases nationalism. It allows him to continue his policies. Whether or not it's a small or large win, he still gets the access there.
Can I see that they want to go to other frameworks
Yep.
to then realign and
Yeah,
then
it's highlighted, or like it's highlighted. It's the light above the talks about frameworks, the other ones that's
wait. So the highlighted blue is not specific.
Oh yeah, it is. The highlighted blue is why, but right up here it says that like they're turning to other frameworks, and it says right here why they're turning to other frameworks.
That was 9 seconds. And can I also see that? Wait. Okay, no. Sorry. Okay, look, we're gonna take prep time. We have like a minute 30 left. Start. So you tell me that India is going to, so like out of your 3 contentions, which one has the biggest impact?
I mean, we'd say all of them have really big
Like which one has the
impacts.
biggest one? Like out of the 3?
I mean, we're not gonna collapse right now in crossfire, but like I guess you could say that the ones that hurt people, or like I'd say like we'd say our impact on our first contention is pretty big because it prereqs a lot of stuff.
Why is it prereq ours?
Yeah, because if states aren't willing to comply with the voluntary resolutions that the Security Council
So that-
sets up, and
If they're not complying right now, then what?
they are complying right
No,
now.
they're not.
You-
They're
like-
turning away. You don't respond to the evidence that indicates
Well-
that 85% of the calls for reform stem from the root of lack of representation.
Yes, but those 85% of states that you talk about still apply for a non-permanent seat every year. They still follow the
Okay, they
resolutions.
obviously still want to be on the secret. Like,
Yes, because they view it as legitimate. They view a seat.
There's only a couple states that do that. There's other countries that move away to other international institutions, and the
Like-
evidence that
like
you showed
what?
me is so bad.
Like what?
So, countries in Africa, they go to the African Union.
Right, they-
They're African,
But
Arab
why-
states and like.
Why do
coalitions.
all of those states apply for a non-permanent seat every year? If
They don't
councils-
all apply for non-permanency.
So like who are the non-permanent members right now?
Even if they do apply,
Yes.
because they want somewhat of like influence whatsoever.
Right.
We would argue.
Wait, they
We
do
would
it for
argue-
influence.
But we would argue.
Because the council's
Wait.
legitimate.
No, it's not. It's becoming illegitimate over time. But our argument is that they're pulling out of certain things like funding, even though they still would like want to go on the council. They're not going to like sacrifice a lot of their resources for the council. That's our argument. That's why PKOs have been decreasing in
Right, and
efficiency.
India represents all the countries that are cutting funding right now.
Majority, yes.
A majority, right?
Yes.
So like countries in the African Union, things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so India didn't represent their interests the last time they were at a seat. Why would they do it now?
Because they have a permanent seat. Like the reason that they did represent their interests inherently because they're a developing nation. But secondly, I would argue that they couldn't actually pass anything.
Yes,
because-
they could.
No,
They could propose resolutions.
Oh,
that
they
they're
can
not
propose a
member.
resolution and they just veto it. That's why nothing happened. That's
No,
the reason.
bro,
They weren't
wait.
a permanent member.
Africa wants representation. They want the India to be like, we want
You're like
these
really
resolutions
like
passed.
misconstruing this. India is not the same on a temporary seat than on a permanent seat.
Right,
They are going to
but the
advocate a lot more because they now
Right,
have the
but
power
the
to.
purpose of the non-permanent trial from 2011 to 2012 was for India to show how they would govern on the permanent seat. That's the whole point of why they got on there. And when they were a non-permanent member,
Well, no.
they didn't represent Africa.
No,
They
yes,
didn't
they
represent
did.
the Middle East. No, they didn't.
Yes, it did. Even if you buy that, you don't respond to the analysis that we tell you in rebuttal that you drop, is that they still need international support to pass any reform whatsoever. So inherently, to have international reform, they need to
But
get votes, and
legitimacy
to get
is a-
votes, they need to represent the African states.
Legitimacy is a prereq towards international support. When the council does, when member states don't view the council as legitimate, then they don't give support.
Okay, yeah, we agree.
Yes,
The
exactly.
the council's
So that's
going
why-
down.
yes.
Like their legitimacy is going down. People are not funding, and like
No, you tell me that right now 85% of states want to expand membership. You also tell me on a separate tangent that people move towards other frameworks. We tell you both of those things, one, do not decrease legitimacy, two, are in the
Yes,
process
they
of
do.
adapting towards Security Council resolutions right now,
Are-
and three,
wait.
are going to not be solved by India because
No,
India is
those
not the correct
warrants-
actor.
Those warrants lead to our conclusion that says that the UNSC will collapse.
Here's the thing, we believe India is not just not the right actor. That's the whole point of our argument.
So I'm gonna be starting on their case and then we're gonna go to our case. Is everyone ready? Good. Yes. Okay. So on their case, we await because a lack of funding is a reason why there's a lack of legitimacy. We say that we impact 2/3 of all conflict throughout the world. They only impact a specific area in Kashmir. We say that we are requisite because if the UN collapses in 15 years, there will be no council in the first place to solve these problems about legitimacy and mediation. They never respond to our themes and also find that a lack of global representation is the problem. This is because 85% of all these complaints are because of lack of representation of third world nations and developing worlds. They never respond to the poverty and also finds that the APSA and other Arab states are going away from the UNSC because the realize it's not because it's very ineffective and very illegitimate. They said that India would amend the charter, but we said that India would have reformed internal reforms on the council once they get on to actually make more effective reforms on the PKOs and other things like that. We say on their second intention, talking about Kashmir, that the UN has needed in the past 50 years. They have no interest doing it right now. Because the second that India gets onto the council, they'll actually have PKOs to solve the conflict. Then at the very bottom of the case, extend the 90, this says that India will win irregardlessly. They said the national will happen irregardlessly in both worlds, but we said that BJP is spending nationalism right now the status quo and increase tensions. In the Afro to actually solve because they have internal support to actually decrease nationalism and tensions. On our case, they have three responses on our first warrant talking about Indian influence. We say that India needs support to pass any resolution in the first place. The reason that they talk about is only temporary members. That is the reason why developing nations were looking to India. But the second that India goes to become a permanent member, all these developing nations will actually turn back and actually fund the UN. They say that Modi is actually hurting legitimacy. We say with their roots analysis that India still needs support to get into the council and actually expand any reforms. They say that we're only cherry picking a few examples, but the BBC analysis finds that 75% of the world's population is effectively disenfranchised because of the UNSC, causing developing nations and third world nations to turn away. They're gonna try to go hard, but this Mukherjee analysis finds that India's only doing it to get a ploy to go onto the council. Two responses. First, since the 1950s, India's been giving aid to represent the third world nations and developing nations' interests. And second, they literally gave up their seat in the 1952 China to be non-political and expand foreign aid. This is why we say that right now it is very ineffective, the UNSC. But the second that India gets onto the council, it will do two things. It promotes democracy and B, make it more legitimate and represent the developing world's needs.
Are you going to take part time?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll start.
Start that now.
Oh, do you want to know?
That's that. Yeah, that's good. Go. I'll stop there.
Oh, you still need the time.
Yeah. Thanks.
How much do you guys have used so far?
We used 14, then a minute 11, and then 9. Like, I don't know.
Oh, so
I think we have.
I think you have
Wait,
like
we have
20 left.
21. Yeah.
Yeah.
21 left?
Yeah. 21.
Alright, it's gonna start off with their weighing, and then down their case, and then over to ours. Everyone ready? Yeah, start Brett. Yeah, yeah.
How much is that?
Okay.
3 seconds.
It's 18.
18. Alright, yeah, so weighing, half, neck.
Okay.
Okay. Start off with their weighing. They say that funding is going to increase, but understand that our link into this is that African countries believe they're being supported. That doesn't happen because of the link term that Aruna puts on our case. So flip over there. He says that they don't represent Africa. Now they give 2 responses. They say that in the 1950s, since the 1950s, they've been giving aid. Aid is not the same as representing them in the council. The other thing they say is that they gave away their seat in the 1950s. They gave it away. That was only because partition was going on and they didn't trust the West. They thought that the U.S. was baiting them. That's really critical because you can look to the more recent empiric example, which says that when they were on the non-permanent member, when they were supposed to be representing African and third world interests, they actually did not. That's the only empiric example. That's the cleanest place that you can look at what actually happens in the real world. You can extend that, but the other thing you can extend is the 3 dealings that Aruna puts on our case. If their narrative was true and that the council was illegitimate, people would not, number one, be following the things that the UNSC puts forth, but second, they wouldn't be paying tons and tons of money in order to get on the council because their narrative is fundamentally untrue. There's no offense coming off the affirmative case. On to our case. Kick C3 about Modi, it's non-unique. Then on C1 about legitimacy. You can extend the second link about human rights, which goes completely dropped in the summary. This is really critical because we say that India is uniquely bad for human rights. In fact, it's said that it's the worst place to be a woman in the entire world. Because of their poor human rights, it actually decreases the legitimacy of the council. That's where you can extend the impact of voluntary cooperation. When countries see India imposing sanctions on countries with human rights, it's seen as hypocritical, so they don't follow them. Then on our C2 about Kashmir, this is going to be the most important link. Extend the link about extremists, which he does in Frontline as well. It says that when India gets power, it riles up terrorists in Pakistan, which causes more conflict, which spurs the conflict on. This is a unique link into it. It doesn't rely on the veto power, and it's totally untouched by everyone's last speech. That's really critical because when India gets more power and it spurs terrorism, you can extend the impact of psychological violence. It says that in the Kashmir Valley, we've seen an increase of suicide by 34%. This is one of the most important impacts in today's round because it actually affects people. It's not something in the abstract. Thus, we negate.
Can I see? I think we have we still have like 20 seconds left. Can I see that they're not following, or they're following things in the UN right now? And then can I also see that they're like paying to get into it?
Yeah.
Actually, can I just get the date?
I'll just give you the date.
Yeah, I just want the date.
Yeah, sure. 2010.
Okay.
2019,
The 2010.
2010?
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's the title.
Okay. Oh, it's very fast.
Wait, can I see the card though?
Yeah, I thought you just wanted the date. If you want the citation, we have it. It's just not on that specific card. Use it a lot.
Wait, where is it?
Wait, where?
It's the card with the number.
Can you highlight it?
Yeah. Oh, I will put-
Okay,
It's like the full thing. I'll just put it in PDF. Okay, it's this whole paragraph right here that lists the 3 reasons out.
But can you
And it's actually like we actually read like the whole paragraph.
I don't have the time.
Like not a single word in there is like useless.
Oh, vote. Oh, vote buying. Okay, are you ready for Grand Cross?
Yeah.
So let's talk about your card. Your card
Yeah,
talks
sure.
about vote buying.
Where does it say that?
Where it says vote buying, like the third to last sentence. Isn't that like different than paying to get into the council in the first place?
No, it says that every October in the UNGA states, it says that every October in the UNGA is filled with the capacity of delegations to 12 new rotating UNSC members.
No, because because vote buying is way different than what you're talking about in your analysis. Vote buying is when one country says, okay, I'm gonna give you more aid if you vote in a favor of
In
this
my
resolution.
Right? Okay, sure.
Okay. You can have a question.
Well, like, what's wrong with that then? Like, explain like.
That the dealing is not work and like in line with your evidence. But that does. But
Okay,
that,
sure, that's one of the 3 then. You guys want to
Wait,
have
what
a
are the
question?
other? You only extended 2. You only extended that they're following with them right now, and then that they're paying to get in. That's the only 2 that you.
No, we extended behavior, we extended that they check with other frameworks, and then we expanded that
They're
they're
not
paying for
extended.
members.
Okay, it's
Alright,
You have
so,
a question.
yeah, let's talk about this weighing, right? So like your responses to the Mukherjee evidence just says that in 1950, like we've been giving aid since then, and then like
Sure.
we
What's
gave
up
up our
with Mukherjee?
Yeah, your
stores.
Mukherjee evidence is just saying that India is doing it as a ploy to get onto the council.
Yeah, but
basically.
our analysis that you don't really respond to is that they still need international support on the permanency to pass any reform. Can I have a question?
Well, no, the problem is that response doesn't interact with our link. Our
So
link
why?
is that India gives aid and they do great things inside of Africa right now. One, that doesn't interact with the idea that in 2012 they were on the council, they were giving aid, but they didn't represent interests. India could give as much aid as they want to Africa, but
No,
that doesn't mean that when they're on the council, they will represent interests, which is your link into them paying back loans.
Okay,
That's the
wait,
problem.
Wait, the problem with your your analysis is that they don't you say that they haven't done anything on the temporary seat. Yet we say that currently, right now, they're calling for reform, and even if you don't buy that, on the temporary seat, it's basically like you can't do that much. On the permanent seat, we tell you they get 10 times more voting power.
You say
than
that
one.
you
Can I have a
say
question?
that they're calling for reforms.
Yes.
But these reforms are simply putting themselves
No, they're not.
on the council.
Yes.
We
No,
give
they're
you
trying to
we give you
represent
the
the developing.
reforms.
They're trying to represent the developing world.
Decrease PKO times, increase funding for PKOs. Can I have a question?
Yeah.
So you tell me that India is bad for human rights, and then you contradict yourself in summary by saying that they're going to sanction countries that do human rights. So holistically, if India does sanction countries who do practice human rights violations, then why is that a bad thing?
We don't contradict ourselves. That's what happens in your world. Our entire argument.
That's a good thing, though, right?
No. It's because countries don't follow through with the sanctions. Because India is a human rights violator, and they see that India is like, for example, sanctioning Libya for violating human rights. Then other UN member states see that as hypocritical, like they did in 1992, and don't follow the
But
sanctions.
India wasn't even on the council.
Right, it was a
back then,
different
too.
actor,
It was
but
still
that's-
it was still illegitimate in 19.
Right, it's based on decisions, right? That's the problem. Is that you say that India is such a great actor for the council, but they are not good. They're not like an inherently moral good
That
actor.
basically
So every
concedes-
resolution that they pass will not be followed, which is why it's a solvency deficit on your entire
That
case.
basically
Could we have a
concedes
question?
that basically concedes that the UN is losing legitimacy. But can I
No, that concedes that
That's
when
cross.
you affirm, it loses legitimacy.
Wait, can I see the card that in 2011 they didn't represent? Africa?
Yes.
go on to my case and then their case. Is everyone ready? Okay. The best way to go for us is on our second link on boosting legitimacy. We tell you that 75% of the world's population is disenfranchised, causing developing nations to turn away. They give you 3 responses. First, they say that they're following things in the status quo. I called for the citation on their card. It's from 2010. We tell you from 2012, countries are turning away and forming their own frameworks. They just say that they do that to turn back. Their evidence doesn't actually say that. But then, they say that they're going, like India hasn't represented Africa in like 2011. The problem here is that they don't respond to the international support analysis that when they're on the permanent seats, they now need to rally votes and represent Africa. But secondly, we would say that as a developing nation, India inherently represents interest in countries like Africa. But third, we tell you the reason that they didn't do anything in 2011 is because they didn't have the ability to do so. We tell you that when they get permanent membership, they get 10 times more veto power, which actually allows them to do successful and meaningful action. But then they say that countries are like paying their way into the Security Council. We would say that that's going to decrease over time. That's because the UN is going to collapse the UNSC is going to collapse in 15 years. Also, their card just talks about veto buying, which is a lot way different than trying to pay to it inside of the seat. But then, at the end of the day, when India joins the council, they get multinational support because they now impact to developing nations, according to our evidence, which is why they allow for repaying debt in the country because $2 billion of debt is incurred to the UN because countries don't want to fund and pay their dues due to a lack of representation because they didn't respond to the analysis that 85% of complaints of reform are actually because of a lack of representation. Go to their case. Their second link on human rights relations, 2 responses. First, they still need international support, so not going to do anything. But secondly, their link is untrue. They say that they haven't followed through sanctions in the past. That's because of a lack of legitimacy. India is going to fix that. But then on the Kashmir, we say that they drop the turn that Modi in turn to boost nationalism is what he does when increasing insecurity. However, in a campaign win, Modi actually decreases nationalism because it's a landslide win for him. But then on Kashmir, we would argue that Pakistan doesn't actually have the resources or any political capital to respond.
Okay, we'll start our prep class, please. 18 seconds.
Okay, sorry.
Alright, the app, neg, then voters. We'll start with a little bit of weighing that they put and then ethnic voters. Okay. Their weighing goes into the link about whether or not countries perceive India as the actor that needs to represent them. If they lose that, they lose the weighing, which means technically by their own logic, they lose the debate. Let's go on to their side of the case. They extend 3 critical things in the last speech. First, they say that 75% of people are disenfranchised. That does not say that India is the actor that needs to be representing them. That's for a couple of reasons that they do not frontline properly. The first one is the turn from Mukherjee. The only thing that they say on top of the Mukherjee turn is that right now, the 2012 example was not the right one because India could not have the same power as they needed. The problem is that India is to represent interests, not to veto other countries, which means that India had the exact same power. In fact, the card that we read to explicitly says that the purpose of the 2011-2012 term was to see how India would act as a permanent member, and they knew that was the burden on top of them. Insofar as they did not represent African interests in that time period, that shows that they don't get access to the majority of their links inside of their case. But the next thing that they tell you is that countries are turning to other forms of framework. You can call for the Council on Foreign Relations evidence. It says that the reason that they're turning to other frameworks is because they need to adapt towards Security Council resolutions, because not all resolutions can be adaptable. That means that they use other frameworks in order to adapt themselves to fix the security problems inside of the world. Then finally, the last thing that they extend is this idea that the UNSC is going to collapse in 15 years. Once again, they're just spreading through ink. They do not respond to the no warrant argument. Their card does not have a singular warrant. Right, 15 years is the timeline for when this would happen. Let's go to our side of the case. There are 2 clean places where you can sign your ballot for the negative, and the first one is on Pakistan. The only thing they say is that Pakistan would not have a military response. That's not the link. It's militancy organizations inside of Pakistan which are inherently non-governmental. That's where you can extend the impact. The only impact inside of the round, because they don't extend a single impact in summary or final focus, there's really no reason to vote for them on impact health. 34% of psychological violence increases in their world. That means on impact health, we are outweighing on every single link. You could buy everything they've said so far, and even then you don't know why you're voting for them. But then on contention 1 about legitimacy, the only thing that they say is that India would fix the legitimacy, but that's not not true. Because of their poor human rights that they're not going to fix when they get on the council, they don't get access to that link, which means that we see another situation like we saw in 1902 in Libya, where countries do not follow through on sanctions because they see the decision made by the council members as inherently illegitimate. Thus, we urge a negative ballot. Thank you.